Hello, my name is Rebecca Jordan. Today I'm going to talk about some data that Amanda Sorensen and I analyzed from a larger research project called collaborativescience.org. I would like to begin by acknowledging the many organizations that were involved in this project, from Databasin to Indiana University, Colorado State University, Rutgers University, Michigan State University, and Virginia Tech. This work was funded by the National Science Foundation. The impetus behind our study comes from the fact that individuals in communities often struggle with playing a role in natural resource management and conservation. Many people would like to be part of the decision-making process, but the use of those data, in particular, this study, citizen science data for this decision-making is pretty limited. And for my colleague and I, we've been working with citizen scientists for a number of years, and we wanted to be able to help facilitate the use of their data in regional decision-making and management processes. The project I'm going to tell you about is called collaborativescience.org, and again is a partnership of the organizations that I mentioned in the acknowledgements. The idea was to provide individuals with a cyber-enabled opportunity to use their data or the evidence that they're gathering in support or refute a particular claim in the decision-making process. Basically, individuals would come to this project as a team. This was usually established by a team leader, an individual who is engaged either through a Friends of a particular park group, or maybe they were master naturalists, or just a concerned citizen who often pulled together other people of shared concern or just their friends and said, hey, let's sign up for collaborativescience.org. They have the opportunity to apply for $2,000 worth of funds to do the project. And really what they need to give to the project is some time in learning and in engaging in the processes in the project. And from that, they benefit by gaining funds to undertake the project and some support in how they might present the work. So we had 10 projects participate in the project thus far. And basically when a group signs up, they are asked to talk about the goals of their project. Maybe they want to be a part of, say, invasive species removal, invasive species monitoring, native species monitoring. They want to be a part of certain land preservation, water quality implementation. The projects really span the gamut. They'd have the opportunity to participate in lessons and then engage in the adaptive management process, all entirely online. They could work together as a group in front of a computer, or they can work separately. What makes our project a little bit different from other projects of similar nature was that our individuals engaged in our project explicitly engaged in modeling. The type of modeling they did was fuzzy cognitive mapping, which basically allows individuals to work with certain components in the model, and the arrows of these components would represent driving relationships, say more of this means more of that, or limiting relationships, more of this means less of that. And then using fuzzy logic, the mathematics sort of behind the creation of these models, would allow individuals to then generate bar charts saying, well, what if I increase this driver? What if I mitigated that influence? What would the outcome be expected with respect to the particular phenomena at hand? So basically, individuals would start the process by discussing, and then the model would represent sort of their hypothesis or their explanation of why they are seeing what they are seeing with respect to that resource, whether it be the presence or absence of invasive species, whether it be the presence or absence of particular water contaminants, whether they're seeing flooded or other undesired aspects of their local environment The individuals would create a model that they feel characterizes as an explanation what was happening. They have the opportunity to implement either data collection or management strategies. They would continue to collect data or evaluate around this strategy and then share their findings, hopefully in support of engagement with resource management. The online coursework was about 8 hours. It focused more on systems and ecosystems ecology, including human dimensions. And the collaboration occurred almost entirely through their own sort of social groups, networks that way, and then through this modeling process. As individuals needed, we would help connect individuals with certain experts to help them decide what they were going to design or what they needed to do. These were generally 1-hour consults. The participants in this study were predominantly white. They tended to be highly educated, relatively affluent, and a bit older. Many were already active in citizen science and conservation education, which is likely how they found out about our project. Our goals for the broader aspect of this project was to look at how individuals captured ideas, how they mapped those ideas, and how they collected evidence in support or refute of those ideas. In this case, individuals came together to create a model as to what they think was happening. They thought that the presence of cattle along upstream of a popular fishing hole was resulting in increased coliform counts. They wanted to look at this in particular to see if indeed their hypothesized relationship had support. They did so by gathering data with support of the landowners and looking at water entering property, water leaving the property of different cattle ranches. Some of these ranches had buffers, and some of these ranches had cattle standing entirely in the stream. And they worked very closely with a scientist who had done this kind of work before, who basically within an hour showed them how to plot a regression type relationship that then they were able to use with the Soil Conservation District and $200,000 to work with the landowners to then mitigate the lack of buffering zones within certain creeks in this watershed. And then our role in the project, myself and colleague Amanda Sorensen and some other colleagues from Rutgers and Michigan State and Indiana University in particular, was to look at learning both in models and in the kinds of talk in which people engage. Individuals did not always collect field data. Sometimes they used available evidence, in this case, looking at perhaps something like GIS layers, and then being able to plot what they thought might be happening along some of these layers. In this case, it was looking at the presence or absence of invasive mosquitoes. Myself and the learning scientists on the team were really interested, like I said, in the kinds of talk that individuals engaged in around conservation and looking at the impact of participation on these projects in terms of these collaborative scientific type practices where experts and non-experts were engaged. The discourse analyzed for the particular study we're talking about today came from 4 of the projects in which there were 4 groups of participants. These individuals were mostly Virginia Master Naturalists. There were some that joined the project after and did not go through the Master Naturalist training. They were from New Jersey and were interested in stormwater within their local region. The reason why we chose these 4 groups out of the larger number of groups is that they had similar types of projects, and we found in 2 of these projects there was an individual who identified as an expert. That is, they had both professional and private experience in working within, in the case of the Johnson grass study, working within invasive species control, and in the case of stormwater control. And so we thought that these would be nice comparison groups to look at the presence or absence of experts. The reason why we chose this study is in when we looked at very closely the kinds of talk, and this is part of another just study around with individuals within two of the groups, we found that the role of the facilitator and the roles of the experts changed. We found that as discussions moved on, anecdotal information came up, there was more co-creative types of discussions, so to speak, and it led us to question whether or not the discussions were truly different when the citizen scientists were engaging in problem solving with or without the expert. So we use discursive analysis, which is basically a type of broad inductive coding, somewhat similar to grounded theory, to analyze pre and post discussion of two groups with an expert present and two groups without an expert present. Because these were pre and post, this resulted in a total of 8 transcripts that were about an hour long.
For the coding scheme, we coded 4 types of responses. The first, or types of interactions rather, the first dealt with questions, either seeking new information or reaffirming information. The second dealt with countering, and that is when claims are made in direct counter to another's idea or claim. Or collaborate, that is where claims are built sort of together. This process was most often a co-created type of process where one individual shared some information, someone else built on that information, as might be expected when there is no sort of right or wrong answer. And then the fourth and final was a broader category of sort of general or other information. We found that the bulk of the discussions really did focus on the questions and collaboration encounter. And since that was the interest of ours to look at these ideas with respect to modeling, we focused exclusively on those and presenting our results. On the left, you have the expert discussions, and on the right, you have the non-expert. In blue are questions, in orange are countering, and in gray are those collaboration type codes. You may see with the expert, the differences exist pre to post, where there is perhaps a type of trade-off between questions versus collaboration. Questions were higher pre, collaborations was lower, and that relationship was inverse. In addition, we see that there was some countering occurring there. In the non-expert, what's obvious is there was no countering, and we did not find differences. I should say that these are averaged across the different groups in each of the category, expert or not expert. And what we're looking at here is just sort of percent time overall that individuals spent engaging in that discursive practice. The implications of our studies is broad. Experts did not tend to ask as many questions as the non-experts. Of course, there was 2 experts, one for each group, but they asked very little questions compared to the other participants. The overall rate of countering was pretty low, and it only occurred, however, in the expert group. And that what was most obvious was perhaps that sort of trade-off, and that pattern was seen with both groups, where participants were sort of asking more questions. Not surprisingly, an expert was present, and then with time began engaging in that more collaboration phase. Might that be something they need to do? Confidence needs to develop before they feel comfortable in that phase. Obviously, these data are pilot data. We don't have very many. We want to look at this in more detail. And in particular, we really want to understand what the role of that expert in that discussion was. This, again, was sort of happenstance, as I mentioned previously. We didn't plan to have experts present necessarily. Might we consider doing so in the future, which is more apt for a more top-down model of citizen science? Might that not be necessary, and that experts can be consulted at certain points? This is particularly important if we're going to look at the kinds of practices and strategies groups use to be successful, and by successful, I mean they obtain their goals. As I mentioned earlier on in the talk, that we had 10 total groups. 6 of them were successful in that they met their goals, including the 4 different groups that we talked about here. 4 groups ultimately disbanded before either gathering data or even getting into the modeling phase. And so the question is, because experts are a limiting resource in many ways, and often they look at a problem maybe not entirely from the perspective of the local community, how can we best use that limited resource, or how can we best empower the community to do what they need in the future? Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the panel discussion.